As somebody that's played a lot of Sapphire Steel in the previous sets, I'm very excited to take a look at the new cards that are coming in Shimmering Skies. I think there's going to be some cool cards that we're going to look at today that are really going to shake up the meta, and especially there's an uncommon one that's going to be pretty cheap to acquire, but I think it has one of the most game-changing abilities that we've seen come out yet. If you guys enjoy Lorcana content and deck videos like this, I'll link the playlist above in one of the cards. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We are pushing our way to 500 subs, and I really appreciate all the recent support that we've gotten. Now with that out of the way, let's go right into the deck list. Now if you want to just see what the deck is, down below I'll leave a link to Dreamborn with the deck laid out. It's going to be very similar to decks that we've run previously for Sapphire Steel, but we're adding in a couple of the new cards with the new set to see if it changes up how we play against some of the meta matchups, and particularly there's a certain combo in this version of the deck that will almost guarantee our wins if we get the right cards in our hand and we have enough time to play them. I'll talk about that combo at the end of the video, but first, let's hop right into the 1-cost characters. First up, for 1 cost, we're going to go with the Captain Hook. He is a 1/2 with Challenger 2. I think having this card in the deck is rather important, especially since we're seeing so many, especially with Amber getting a 1/4 body on the board turn 1 with the new Daisy Duck. Getting as much damage as possible onto it's going to be important. But also, this Captain Hook's just very good to shut down the board in the early game, take out most cards that our opponents are going to be questing with. But if you have a better 1-drop in your opinion, feel free to use that instead. Most likely our turn 1 is going to be the classic Popsicle or Fortisphere, so this is just kind of a bonus card slot that we've included here just to have a character just in case. And now moving on to the 2-cost cards, it's going to be Chicha, Dedicated Mother. This is one of the new cards in Shimmering Skies, and what's cool about this card is once you play it, as soon as we start double inking per turn, we're going to be able to draw on the second time that we've inked. Meaning that one of the previous downsides of Sapphire, where you'd have to spend an extra card from your hand in order to get that ink advantage, is now going away with this early game character. If we can keep this on the board for a couple turns without questing it, we'll be able to get that card draw up, and this comes online before Hiram traditionally would, so we're getting that benefit even faster. Another new character that we're going to be taking a look at is going to be Tipo. He's got a similar ability to Mickey Mouse and to 1 Jump Ahead, but the interesting thing about this card is instead of taking from the top of your deck, when you play this character, you actually take a card from your hand and place it into your inkwell. He actually has like the fishbone quill effect, but it's when he enters play, meaning if we can get this out on turn 3 with our Chicha up, we'll be able to draw a card for playing our second ink of the turn. And then up next, a 2-cost character that we're including in the deck just to try and persuade our opponents not to quest with their important characters. It's going to be Argies. He can take out pretty much anything early game in 1 shot, and we used this previously to get a better matchup against Ruby Amethyst, being able to take out the Sisu cards in 1 go, and now can take out that new Daisy Duck card in 1 go. You are paying a little bit more ink to play him, but with Sapphire we typically have an ink advantage, so including 3 copies of this just in case. And now my most anticipated card of the set to see how this really plays out, it's going to be Pete, Games Referee. When you play this character, your opponent's not allowed to play any actions until your next turn, and that includes actions and songs, meaning you won't have to deal with Be Prepared, you won't have to deal with Dragonfire, with Grab Your Swords. Your opponent's going to have to rely on items, locations, and characters to deal with your current board state, and this is going to be a key piece to set up our big combo play to win most games. And with him only being an uncommon character, it'll be very easy for you to acquire this card. I'm super happy for something like this to be added in the game. I was a huge fan of the Tiana card from set 2, but with Tiana, you had to play with 0 cards in her hand, which was never really an ideal situation, and she had to be exerted for her ability to take effect, meaning that a rush character could take her out and nullify the field, allowing your opponents to play actions on that same turn. With this card activating until the start of your next turn, there's no way for your opponents to counter that once you've played it, meaning that we have some free real estate there to set up our big plays and quest for up to 10 lore on our next turn. And then moving on, another character that is new for Shimmering Skies, it's going to be a new Belle card, Belle of the Ball. She's 4-cost uninkable. She does have Ward, but the main reason we are playing her is when you play her, you're going to give all your characters on the field Ward as well, meaning we're giving a little bit extra safety to the cards that we have on the board. And she's also questing for 2, meaning we're able to get a little bit more lore in the early game while also keeping our Hiram safe from targeted abilities. Since this is uninkable though, we'll just run 3 copies of it. And then again, this is all up in the air. All these numbers, all these inclusions might change, but something that never changes in Sapphire decks is going to be 4 copies of Hiram. It is just too good of a card to leave out of the deck. As you know, whenever you play Hiram or whenever he quests, you can get rid of one of your items and draw 2 cards. This is the main draw engine of Sapphire decks. And we are playing specifically a no wheel version, so no whole new world, because I think with the tools that Sapphire is getting in this set, you don't need to fully discard your hand anymore and give your opponent an advantage as well. We should have more than enough card draw on our own to be self-sustained. Next up, let's talk about the 6 ink Simba card, Son of Mufasa. Not only am I including this as a very thematic inclusion, but this is going to be able to get rid of any item or location, so it fills the role of Rise of the Titans that we used to play in this deck. But getting a character on board is always a plus, especially if our opponent's playing that Pete. This card will still use its abilities, whereas we wouldn't be able to use Rise of the Titans. So I'm sure there's going to be areas where maybe you want one or the other, but I always like having more characters on the board, because at the end of the day, you do need characters to quest and win the game, unless you're doing some kind of crazy action combo that Amethyst might be getting. All right, and then another Floodborn to talk about in the deck. We're going to be running Giant Fairy Tinkerbell. It's a staple to steel decks. When you play her, deal 1 damage to everything on the board on your opposing side of the field, as well as when she banishes somebody in a challenge, you can then deal 2 damage to any opposing character of your choice, making this a great card to start to chip away at some of the low cost characters and really swing the tempo into your favor. All right, and then next up, since we are running more of a character focused deck, I did choose to include 2 copies of Hades. Hades is a 7 cost, uninkable, 3/6 questing for 2, and when you play him, you can choose an opposing character, put it in the inkwell. This is great for getting something without ward off the field, especially if it's like a big evasive body that you don't have the answer to, or a big bodyguard you don't have the answer to. You can just get it out of the way. It does have the downside of giving your opponent ink for the next turn, but I think the upside of this card definitely outweighs that, and it's worth including at least some copies of it into this version of the deck. All right, and now the card that everyone is super excited for. It is the legendary Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock. He is a 8 cost uninkable, 4/9, questing for 4 with 2 abilities. The first one is, when you play this character, exert all cards in your inkwell, then at random, take 2 and put them back into your hand. And a second ability, everything the light touches. Whenever he quests, you're going to be able to reset everything in your inkwell, meaning you essentially get an extra turn's worth of ink to make more plays, play more characters, tap more lucky dimes, etc. This card in particular is going to fill the place that Ariel had in the last set for our deck. It's going to be the alternate win condition from Tamatoa, so I'm only choosing to include 2 copies in this version. Also because it's going to be very expensive, so I don't want to break the bank to build this deck in person. And then at the end of the video, I think I've got a way to actually keep him safe enough to be able to use his second ability and win the game. But hold on, because we still have a couple more cards to talk about until then. And then, as expected, a staple to most Sapphire decks, it's going to be Tamatoa So Shiny. When you play him, you can bring an item back from your discard. Same thing when he quests. And this character gets an extra lore for every item that you have in play. We've seen this now for a couple sets as the meta for Sapphire decks. Just the ability to get those items back over and over again, but also being able to get 8, 9, 10 lore in one turn based on how many items you have. Super strong. Moving on now to the only action that we're including in the game, just for some early game answers and responses. That's going to be Baboom. 2 copies of this. I would love to include more copies of Baboom, because against certain early game combinations, you do need to have an answer pretty quickly. But I kind of just ran out of room with this deck in particular. So leaving it at 2 copies. Baboom is you deal 2 damage to a location or character, and it's inkable. And then speaking of dealing 2 damage, we've also got Grab Your Sword. This one deals 2 damage to everyone. It can be sung because it's a song. This is a very strong just board clear, especially if you can play this comboed with a Tinkerbell. Just to do 3 damage across the board, it's going to get rid of most things that your opponents have played. Same thing as with Baboom. Only going to include 3 copies here because we ran out of room for the full playset. But in most cases, 3 copies is more than enough to see it at least once in a game. All right, and then now on to the main win conditions of the deck. It's going to be our items. Trying to get as many items on the board for Tamatoa. Also going to be supplementing our card draw because we're running 4 copies of Popsicle. As well, we're also running 4 copies of Fortisphere. These cards in combination are just very strong. 1 drops, draw a card. but also getting you an extra lore for your Tamatoa. At this point, we've seen these two cards work together in the last set. I don't really think there's much more to say about them. All right, and then up next, an interesting inclusion, especially since we're doing no wheel. It's going to be Fishbone Quill, but I think there's enough utility in this new version of the Sapphire Steel set in this meta to really cancel out the downside from taking an extra card from your hand every single turn. Being able to draw that extra card with Chicha is going to give us more than one option than just relying on Hiram. But everybody knows this card's super strong. Just inking twice in one turn is super strong in general. And I hope that this version of the deck has enough card draw to really make up for the downside of Fishbone. Another way that we're going to supplement our card draw is through Merlin's Carpet Bag. This is a new item coming in Shimmering Skies, and it actually has the Tamatoa ability, but just built into an item. So after you get it onto the field, you can exert and pay 1 ink to return an item card from your discard to your hand. It is a little bit worse than Tamatoa because you have to pay the ink every time you use it, but this is going to allow us to use our popsicles, use our forest spheres, get rid of them with Hiram, or just use their abilities and get rid of them, and then we can pull them back without needing that Tamatoa in play at the time, allowing us to keep drawing cards because they're only ones to play. We can get rid of them, we can play them again. I think this card in particular is going to allow us to activate that cycle of gameplay a lot earlier than we've been used to in previous sets. And I think that Merlin's Carpet Bag is interesting enough to make it so that I would even consider checking out Audrey Ramirez. Whenever she quests, you can re-ready an item. Maybe there's a world where you're getting multiple uses out of your carpet bag, multiple uses out of your lucky dime, and this card here picks up a little bit more steam. But for this deck in particular, I did leave it out. Like I said, I was struggling to fit all the cards we wanted to. Maybe we get rid of the 1-drop Captain Hook and we include Audrey instead. But for now, let's talk about the last 2 cards of the deck. It's going to be the lucky dime, similar to what we ran in the last set. Only 2 copies because really you only want to see it at the end of the game when you're ready to close out and win. All right, and that does it for the full new deck preview of Sapphire Steel. What I think I'm going to at least start off with in Shimmering Skies for playtesting. Now, the win condition for this deck, like I said, is going to be slightly different than it was in previous sets. I think if you can get Pete and Mufasa in your hand, and you have 11 ink on board, you're going to be able to play Pete first, ensure that there's no actions being played to clear the board, play Mufasa, bring your ink total down to 9, then on your next turn, as long as they don't have like a Maleficent's Dragon that can just banish any character, you should be able to quest with Mufasa, getting not only his 4 lore, but also resetting all your ink, meaning that if you have Tamatoa and Lucky Dime in hand, will now be left at 9 ink after Mufasa taking 2 out of your inkwell. So you can play Tamatoa, quest with Mufasa, reset everything, play Lucky Dime, and then tap Lucky Dime, guaranteeing you at least 8 lore alone just with Mufasa on the board. But if you do have a lot of items on the board already, you could tap that Lucky Dime and get upwards to 12 to all the way up to 20 lore in one turn. Like I said, how Steel players use Pete to block board clear abilities is going to be key for us to finally overcome things like Ruby Sapphire, Ruby Amethyst, because it's now finally guarantees that we can play a Tamatoa, play a Pete, and guarantee that those are not going to be taken out of the field unless they have a character that can target something. I think of all the decks that we've built here in the waiting time before the set launches, this is my most anticipated one. As a color combo I played in the last set championships, I can't wait to see how it feels in the new set. That being said, some of these cards are pretty expensive, like that Mufasa is going to be very expensive to purchase. So I hope we could pull at least one in our pack openings, but we'll see. If not, we'll buy the singles. That card alone is going to be one of the most meta-altering cards of the format, because if you can get off a Mufasa play, you should have already set yourself up in a position to win, and getting all that extra ink, being able to use your Lucky Dimes instantly is super, super strong for Sapphire, as we know. All right, and that does it for our deck preview of Sapphire Steel. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. What alterations would you make to this deck list? What cards would you leave off? Anything I forgot to add in? I will be continuing to post new videos on deck content leading up to the launch. And once launch comes, we've got a bunch of exciting content on the way. Thank you guys for tuning in this long, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. See ya.